If you are listening to this, then either I made it out or I didn't, and either way, the record needs to exist. My name is Staff Sergeant Mara Kovacs, United Human Confederation, Combat Division 7, currently, as of this recording, the only military-rated personnel stationed at Outpost Vale 9. That is not a typo. That is not a classification error. There is one soldier here, me. The posting came down 6 weeks ago after what the brass diplomatically called the Proxima incident, which I will not get into, except to say that I was following the spirit of my orders, if not the precise letter of them, and the outcome was favorable, and I still think I was right. Vale 9 is a listening station. Its job is to sit on the edge of contested space and pay attention. My job, technically, is to make sure nobody interferes with that process. In practice, my job has been to fix the heating unit, argue with the supply manifest, teach a young technician named Pryor how to play cards, and eat a truly depressing number of compressed protein bars. There are 2 civilians here besides me. Pryor runs the sensor array. A woman named Dr. Seti runs the communications equipment. They are both good people. Neither of them has ever fired a weapon in their lives, and I mean that as a compliment. That is exactly the kind of people a listening station should be staffed with. I am the wrong kind of person for a listening station. Command knows this. I suspect they sent me here hoping the quiet would change me. It has not. I am recording this at 0340 station time. The sensors went loud 11 minutes ago. 3 Kreth dropships. I ran the profiles twice because I wanted to be sure. Full raid configuration, which means each one is carrying between 12 and 16 soldiers. That is a minimum of 36 armed Kreth, probably more, descending on a station with 2 unarmed scientists, and a sergeant who has been living on protein bars and boredom for 6 weeks. The Kreth did not bother with stealth. Their approach vector was almost casual. I caught pieces of their open-channel comms before they switched to encrypted band, and I want to note for the record that they were laughing. I do not speak fluent Kreth, but I understand enough to know they were making jokes. One of them used a phrase that translates roughly to picking fruit. They thought this was going to be easy. I find that motivating. I sent Pryor and Dr. Seti into the deep maintenance shaft 11 minutes ago. I told them to take water, to stay quiet, and to not come out until I came to get them personally, or until they heard nothing, no sound at all, for 6 straight hours. Pryor started to ask me something. I handed him the water canteen and closed the shaft door. There was no time for the kind of conversation he wanted to have. I have spent the last 4 days preparing this station. Not because I expected this. I did not have any specific intelligence about a Kreth raid, but because preparation is what I do when I am bored, and there is space in front of me that I do not fully control yet. I know every corridor. I know which compartments can be sealed remotely, and which require manual operation. I know that the starboard maintenance corridor has a 90-degree bend at the 14-meter mark that creates a blind approach from either direction, which means that whoever enters it from the east cannot see what is waiting at the bend until they are 3 meters away. I know that the lighting grid runs on a separate circuit from life support and can be controlled from my handheld without triggering any of the environmental alarms. I know that the 2 maintenance drones, the small ones, the ones that normally scrub the filtration vents, can be given movement instructions through the secondary operations panel, and that they weigh about 40 kilograms each, and that 40 kilograms of fast-moving drone in a narrow metal corridor is something that takes a person by surprise the first time they encounter it. I know all of this because I have had 6 weeks and nothing else to do. The Kreth breached the outer airlock at 0347. I watched them on the camera feeds from the operations room. They were organized, which I respected. They moved in 2-unit pairs, covering each other, checking corners. They had done this before. The commander, I could tell by the different colored shoulder markings, signaled them forward with the easy confidence of someone who has done many raids and found them all to be much the same. The first drone hit them at the junction of corridors B and C. I will not describe exactly what happened, except to say it was effective, and that the Kreth commander's easy confidence became something else immediately. He got on the radio. I could not hear the words, but I could see his posture change. He looked at the camera in the corridor. They always look at the cameras, eventually. And I had already looped the feed, so what he saw was an empty hallway. He did not know how many people he was dealing with. That was important. In the absence of information, people fill the gap with their worst fear. I needed him filling that gap for as long as possible. I moved to the starboard corridor. There is a rhythm to these things, and I have learned it well enough that it operates almost below thought. I do not get frightened in the way most people mean when they use that word. I get very focused. Everything becomes simple and clear. There is the objective, there are the obstacles, and there is the path between them. I find it peaceful, in an honest sense, in a way that is difficult to explain to people who have not felt it. 3 of them came down the starboard corridor at 0401. The bend at 14 meters worked exactly as I expected. Afterward, I moved through the section quickly and sealed the connecting bulkhead behind me, cutting off that approach route. The Kreth commander was no longer laughing. I could hear his voice through the station's internal relay, tight and quick, calling back to the ships. He was using a word I recognized. It means reinforcements, but it can also mean, I was wrong about this. By 0430, I had moved through 4 sections, sealed 6 corridors behind me, vented 1 compartment of atmosphere to create an impassable zone without damaging any critical systems, and used the lighting grid to create 3 separate false positions that drew 2 Kreth fire teams in the wrong directions. I was running low on the tools I had prepared in advance. I still had my weapon, my sidearm, the remaining drone, and the things in the station itself that could be turned into leverage with enough creativity. I want to be clear that I was not winning. Winning would mean the Kreth were gone. The Kreth were not gone. There were still a significant number of them on the station. They had adjusted their tactics, and they had stopped underestimating what they were dealing with. They were moving slower now, checking every corner, using their numbers to create overlapping coverage. They were doing exactly what well-trained soldiers do when they realize they are in a difficult environment. I had bought time. I had made them pay for every meter, but they were still coming. What I needed was not more time. What I needed was for them to make a decision. At 0448, I accessed the communications array from a secondary terminal in the engineering bay. The array itself was fried. It had been non-functional since day 2 of my posting, which was one of the many joys of Veil 9, but it could still transmit on short-range local channels. I used it to broadcast a looping Kreth distress signal outward on 3 frequencies, spoofed to sound like it originated from one of their own dropships. I do not know if that confused their fleet command. I hope it did. I had no way of checking. I sent it, and moved on. At 0501, I heard the station go quiet. Not the quiet of an empty place. I know that quiet well. It is what Veil 9 sounds like at 0300, when the systems are running and nobody is moving. This was a different kind of quiet. The kind that happens when many people stop moving at the same time, in response to something. I found out later, much later, when I was able to review the Kreth encrypted channel with a translation assist from the UHC debrief team, that at 0459, the Kreth commander had finally pulled the station's personnel manifest. He had not checked it before the raid. There had been no reason to. It was a listening post. It would have soft personnel. He had checked it now because nothing about this operation matched his expectations, and he wanted to understand what he was fighting. The manifest listed 2 civilian researchers and 1 military staff. Sergeant Mara Kovacs, Combat Division 7, currently assigned Veil 9. The lieutenant's response, according to the translation, was to ask his commander to say the name again slowly. The commander said it again. There was a pause of several seconds. Then the lieutenant said quietly that he had been on the outer edge of the Kessel corridor action and that the stories they told about that engagement were considered exaggerated by most of Fleet Command. He said he was no longer sure they were exaggerated. The commander said nothing for 4 seconds. Then he opened a direct channel to the station. I was in the engineering bay eating the last protein bar in my vest pocket when the channel opened. I let him transmit 3 times before I responded, because patience is a kind of power when the other person is anxious, and I needed him anxious. He spoke carefully. He asked if we could discuss the current situation in practical terms. He called me Sergeant, with the kind of precision that people use when they want you to know they are taking you seriously. I finished the protein bar. I told him I was listening. He asked how many personnel I had on the station. I told him that was not a useful question for him to be asking right now. He tried a different approach. He said that his forces had sustained losses, which I was aware of, and that continuing to press the engagement would result in further losses on both sides, which he wanted to avoid. I told him I appreciated the sentiment. He asked what it would take to reach an arrangement. I told him I had transmitted his fleet's entry vectors, ship composition, and identification codes to the UHC 6th Fleet approximately 40 minutes ago. I told him calmly that a response force was likely in transit and was probably between 15 and 25 minutes out. I told him that he had two choices available to him. His forces could withdraw immediately in whatever ships remained operational and return to Kreth space with a story that, while not flattering, would at least feature survivors, or they could remain and attempt to explain their presence to an incoming UHC fleet response that would have both the firepower and the legal authority to make the next hour very final for everyone involved. I did not threaten him. I laid out the situation as I understood it and let him do the mathematics himself. There was a long silence. Then he asked if I would guarantee safe withdrawal. I told him I would not chase ships that were already running. I told him that was the closest thing to a guarantee he was going to get from me, and I suggested he take it while the window was available. The channel closed. I heard boots on the metal, a lot of them, moving fast, moving toward the airlock and not away from it. I watched the camera feeds, the real feeds this time, not the looped ones, and I watched them go. The dropships lifted at 0519. I tracked them on the sensors until they cleared the edge of my range, which took about 7 minutes, and then they were gone. I sat on the floor of the engineering bay for a little while. Not because I was hurt badly. The graze on my shoulder was minor, nothing that needed more than the field dressing already on it, but because I had been moving and thinking at a very high intensity for a long time, and the body needs a moment when that stops. Then I went to the maintenance shaft and opened the door. Pryor was sitting against the far wall with his knees pulled up to his chest. Dr. Seti was standing with her arms crossed in the way people stand when they have been frightened for a long time and are trying not to show it. They both looked at me when the door opened. They looked at the field dressing on my shoulder. They looked at my face. Pryor asked if it was over. I told him it was over. He asked if the fleet was coming. He asked it in the voice of someone who has been holding on to that detail as the one thing keeping him calm. I looked at him for a moment. He deserved the truth. I told him the comms array has been broken since day 2. There was no transmission. There is no fleet coming. I told him that the Kreth did not know that, and that the difference between what is true and what your enemy believes is true is sometimes the only resource you have, and that tonight it had been enough. Pryor stared at me. Dr. Seti made a sound that was either a laugh or something close to one. I picked up the empty protein bar wrapper from the floor, put it in my vest pocket, and told them both to get some sleep because we were going to have a great deal of paperwork in the morning. This is Staff Sergeant Mara Kovacs, Outpost Vale 9, signing off. Station is holding.